How 4 friends got trapped in the web of the soul. I never wanted to write this down, but I feel like I have to. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid our fate. Or maybe it'll just serve as a warning about what happens when you mess with things you don't understand. Either way, this is the story of how I lost my best friends to something that should never have existed. My name is Marcus, and until 6 months ago, I was just a normal college student at Blackwood University in upstate New York. My 3 closest friends, Jenna, Derek, and Amy, and I, were inseparable since freshman year. We had that kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and know exactly what the other person is thinking with just a look. The kind of friendship that feels unbreakable, if only we had known how fragile it really was. It started with the old Crowley house on the edge of campus. Everyone knew the stories, how it had belonged to some occultist back in the 1920s who supposedly conducted bizarre experiments trying to capture human souls. The official story was that he died in a fire, but local legend said he had succeeded in his experiments and his soul still lingered there, trapping others who ventured too close. We thought it was all bullshit, of course, just another spooky campus legend to scare freshmen. Derek, always the skeptic, loved to mock anyone who claimed they'd seen anything supernatural there. "It's just an old house," he'd say, rolling his eyes. "The only thing haunting it is mold and asbestos." I wish we had listened to the legends. It was mid-October when everything changed. We were hanging out in my dorm room, passing around a bottle of cheap whiskey and trying to avoid studying for midterms. That's when Amy, who had always been fascinated by the occult, pulled out an old leather-bound book she'd found in the university's rare book collection. "Look what I found," she said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "It's Crowley's journal." The librarian didn't even know what it was. It was just sitting in a box of uncatalogued donations. The journal was filled with strange symbols and rambling descriptions of experiments involving souls and consciousness. Most of it seemed like the deranged writings of a madman. But there was one section that caught our attention, a ritual he claimed could allow people to see and interact with souls directly. "We should try it," Amy suggested, her words slightly slurred from the whiskey. "Halloween's coming up. It would be perfect." "Are you insane?" Jenna asked, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. "That stuff isn't real," Derek laughed. "Exactly. So what's the harm? Worst case scenario, we waste an evening doing some stupid ritual. Best case, we prove once and for all that the whole thing is nonsense." I should have spoken up then, should have said no. But the whiskey had dulled my better judgment, and part of me was curious too. So I stayed silent as we made our plans. The ritual had to be performed at midnight during a new moon, which happened to fall on October 30th that year. We needed 4 people, 1 for each cardinal direction, and various items that weren't too hard to get. Black candles, salt, some herbs I'd never heard of. Amy said she could get them from a New Age shop downtown, and something personal from each participant. The hardest part was supposed to be the location. It had to be performed in a place where souls had been trapped before. That's when we knew it had to be the Crowley house. Getting in wasn't as hard as we expected. The university had boarded up the windows and doors years ago, but we found a basement window with loose boards that we could pry off. The house had been grand once, with high ceilings and ornate woodwork, but decades of neglect had left it a shell of its former self. Our flashlight beams revealed peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and thick layers of dust everywhere. The main parlor seemed like the perfect spot for the ritual. We cleared a space in the center of the room and set up according to the journal's instructions. Salt circle, candles at the 4 corners, herbs burning in a brass bowl Amy had brought. We each contributed something personal, a lock of hair, a cherished photo, a beloved piece of jewelry, and a drop of blood. The journal was very specific about that last part. "This is ridiculous," Derek muttered as we took our positions, but I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he lit his candle. Amy began reading from the journal, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The Latin words seemed to echo strangely in the empty house, as if the walls themselves were listening. As she read, the candles flickered even though there was no breeze. That should have been our first warning. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see our breath misting in the air. The flames of the candles turned an eerie blue color, casting strange shadows on the walls. And then we saw it, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. but moving in impossible ways. "Holy shit," Jenna whispered. "Is this really happening?" Before anyone could answer, the shimmer coalesced into something more solid, a swirling mass of what looked like silvery smoke. As we watched, transfixed, it began to take shape. A face emerged from the smoke, hollow-eyed and gaunt, with a twisted smile that made my blood run cold. "Welcome," it said, in a voice that seemed to bypass our ears and speak directly into our minds. "I've been waiting so long for someone to open the door." That's when everything went to hell. The smoke exploded outward, filling the room in an instant. I felt it pressing against me, trying to force its way into my mouth and nose. I could hear the others screaming, but their voices sounded distant and distorted. Through the chaos, I saw Derek collapse, his body convulsing as the smoke poured into him. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The salt circle that was supposed to protect us might as well have been a prison cell. Amy was still reading from the journal, her voice rising to a desperate shout as she tried to complete the ritual. Jenna was on her knees, clawing at her throat as if she was choking. And then I felt it, a presence in my mind, ancient and malevolent, sifting through my thoughts and memories like someone rifling through a filing cabinet. I could feel it pulling at something deep inside me, something that felt fundamental to who I was. My soul. It was trying to take my soul. Through the haze of terror, I remembered something I'd read in the journal but hadn't paid much attention to at the time. Crowley had written about the nature of souls, about how they were connected to each other through bonds of emotion and experience. The stronger the bond, the more power it had. And what bond was stronger than true friendship? That's when I understood. We hadn't been chosen randomly. Our friendship, our deep connection to each other, was exactly what it wanted. We had unknowingly created the perfect web for it to trap our souls. I fought against the presence in my mind, trying to reach out to my friends. "The connection!" I tried to shout, but no sound came out. "Break the connection!" But it was too late. I could feel our souls being pulled apart and rewoven into something else, something wrong. The smoke was no longer just smoke. It was a web, and we were caught in it like flies. The last thing I remember clearly is Amy's voice, still reading from the journal, but the words were different now. She wasn't trying to complete the ritual anymore. She was begging for forgiveness. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They told me they found us in the morning, all unconscious but physically unharmed. Derek was the first to wake up, but he wasn't the same. He didn't speak, didn't react to anything or anyone. It was like he was empty inside. Jenna woke up next, but she couldn't remember anything, not just about that night, but about her entire life. It was all gone, replaced by memories that couldn't possibly be hers, memories of a life lived nearly a century ago. Amy never woke up at all. She's still in a coma, machines keeping her body alive while her soul, well, I don't know where her soul is. Sometimes I think I can feel her presence, like a whisper just out of hearing range, but I can't be sure if it's real or just my guilt playing tricks on me. In me, I survived, more or less intact, but I can feel the web still, stretching between us, binding us together in ways that were never meant to be. Sometimes when I sleep, I dream of that silver smoke, of that twisted smile, of the thing that took my friends from me. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I swear I can hear it laughing. They say the Crowley house burned down a week after they found us. The official report blamed faulty wiring, but I know better. The web needed to spread, to catch more souls in its trap. And what better way to do that than to force its victims to scatter? Derek was transferred to a psychiatric facility in California. Jenna's parents took her back home to Florida. Amy's body lies in a hospital in Massachusetts. And me? I'm still here, carrying this story like a weight around my neck. I know what you're thinking. Why am I telling this story if it might lead others to try the same thing? Because the web is still spreading. I can feel it. Every night, more souls are caught in its trap. And maybe, just maybe, if enough people know the truth, we can find a way to break it. But until then, let my story serve as a warning. Some bonds are meant to be cherished, protected, kept safe in the light of day. But there are other bonds, darker, more insidious ones, that can trap you forever. And once you're caught in the web of souls, there's no telling what might crawl along those threads to find you. I know because they're still out there, my friends, or what's left of them. And sometimes in my dreams, I can feel them calling to me, begging me to help them escape. But I can't. None of us can. Because the web doesn't just trap souls, it transforms them, twists them into something else entirely. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive, that I should focus on moving forward with my life. They don't understand that I'm not really alive, not completely. Part of me is still trapped in that web, stretched between California, Florida, and Massachusetts, connected to the hollow shells that used to be my best friends. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see that silver smoke behind my eyes and that twisted smile playing at the corners of my mouth. And I wonder, did I really escape at all? Or am I just another strand in the web, helping it grow, helping it spread, helping it trap more souls in its ever-expanding reach? So if you value your soul, stay away from old houses and ancient rituals. Don't go looking for ways to see what shouldn't be seen. And most importantly, cherish your friendships, but guard them carefully. Because sometimes the strongest bonds can become the strongest chains, and what starts as an innocent adventure can end in a trap from which there is no escape. As for me, I'll keep searching for a way to free my friends, to break the web that binds us. But deep down, I know the truth. Some webs can't be broken, some souls can't be saved, and some friendships, no matter how pure and true they might have been, are destined to become nothing more than strands in the ever-growing web of souls. The end. Or maybe this is just the beginning. The night shift at Riverside Towers. I never wanted to work as a maintenance guy at Riverside Towers. Fresh out of community college with a half-finished business degree and mounting student loans, I didn't have much choice when the economy tanked. My Uncle Mike pulled some strings to get me the job, and I figured it would just be temporary. A few months tops before something better came along. I had no idea those few months would change my life forever. The building itself was impressive enough. A gleaming 40-story luxury apartment complex in downtown Portland, all glass and steel, reaching toward the perpetually gray Oregon sky. During the day, it was bustling with wealthy tenants and their designer dogs, personal shoppers rushing through the marble lobby, and cleaning crews keeping everything spotless. But at night, when I worked, it was different. The vastness of empty hallways and the echo of my footsteps against polished floors made me feel like I was the last person on earth. My third week on the job, I was finishing up some paint touch-ups on the 37th floor. It was already past my usual clock-out time, around 10 p.m., but I needed the overtime. The property manager had been riding my ass about some scuff marks in the hallway, and I wanted to get it done before morning. The other maintenance guys had already headed home, leaving me alone with my paint rollers and drop cloths. I was cleaning my brushes in the utility closet when the lights flickered, nothing unusual for an old building, even a fancy one like this. But then I heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl. A woman's voice, distant but clear, calling out for help. "Hello?" I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. "Is someone there?" Silence answered back. I should have just packed up and left. That's what any sane person would have done. But something about that voice, the raw desperation in it, pulled at me. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward where I thought the sound had come from. The service elevator was out of order, again, so I took the stairs down to the 36th floor. The emergency lights cast sickly green shadows across the landing, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step. That's when I heard it again, closer this time. A woman sobbing, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that come from a place of absolute despair. "Ma'am," I called out. "I'm with maintenance. Are you okay?" The crying led me to apartment 3613. The door was slightly ajar, which was strange because this unit was supposed to be vacant. The property manager had mentioned something about a renovation delay. I pushed the door open, wincing at the loud creak of hinges. "Maintenance," I announced again, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught dust motes swirling in the air and reflected off plastic sheeting covering what little furniture remained. The sobbing had stopped, but the air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. That's when my flashlight beam landed on her. She was standing in the corner of what used to be the living room, her back to me. Long dark hair fell past her shoulders, and she wore what looked like a cleaning uniform. My first thought was that she must be from the housekeeping staff, though I couldn't remember seeing her before. "Miss, you can't be in here. This unit is closed for renovation." My voice sounded thin and weak in the empty space. She didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, perfectly still. "Look, if you're having some kind of emergency, I can call someone." I took a step forward, and the temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, despite it being a mild September night. Then she turned around. I've spent countless hours since that night trying to describe what I saw, but words always fail me. Her face, what should have been her face, was just wrong. Like someone had taken a photograph and smeared all the features together. But her eyes? God, her eyes were perfectly clear, filled with such profound sadness that it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran like hell, taking the stairs 3 at a time, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby, where I found Rico, the night security guard, doing his crossword puzzle like it was just another normal evening. "Whoa, man, you look like you've seen a ghost," Rico said, looking up from his puzzle. He had no idea how right he was. I tried to tell him what happened, but the words sounded insane, even as I spoke them. Rico listened patiently, then sighed and put down his pen. "Sit down, kid. There's something you should know about apartment 3613. Over the next hour, Rico told me about Maria Suarez. She had worked as part of the cleaning staff at Riverside Towers for 5 years, supporting herself and her young daughter after her husband abandoned them. She was quiet, hardworking, and according to Rico, invisible to most of the wealthy tenants, just another uniformed worker keeping their pristine world running smoothly. But one night, about 2 years ago, something happened in apartment 3613. The official report said she fell while cleaning the windows. A tragic accident. Case closed. But Rico's voice dropped to a whisper as he told me what really happened. There was a tenant, some hotshot lawyer with connections, Rico said, his weathered face tight with anger. He'd been harassing Maria for months. That night he cornered her in that apartment. She fought back, scratched him up pretty good. He pushed her and… Rico trailed off, staring into the middle distance. Her daughter was there. Saw the whole thing. Poor kid was hiding in the closet. What happened to her? The daughter? I asked, dreading the answer. Foster care, I think. The system swallowed her up like it does all the invisible ones. Rico looked at me hard. Listen, what you saw up there, maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was your imagination. But if I were you, I'd stay away from that floor after dark. I should have taken his advice. Should have asked for a transfer or just quit altogether. But that night, lying in my cramped studio apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about Maria's eyes, about her daughter, somewhere out there in the system. And I knew, somehow, that this wasn't over. The next few weeks were a blur of strange occurrences. Tools would go missing, only to turn up in apartment 3613. I'd hear crying in the stairwell, but only when I was alone. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of a small figure, a child, darting around corners, but whenever I looked directly, there was nothing there. The dreams were the worst. Every night, I'd see Maria, but not as the terrifying apparition from that first encounter. Instead, she appeared as she must have been in life, a tired woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and worry lines around her mouth. She never spoke, just pointed urgently at something I couldn't quite see. I started doing research, spending my free time in the public library's archives, scrolling through old newspapers on microfiche. The story of Maria's death had barely made the local news, just a small paragraph in the Metro section. But I dug deeper, looking for anything about her daughter. It took weeks, but I finally found something. A small notice about a custody hearing for one Isabella Suarez, age 6. The date was just a few days after Maria's death. After that, nothing. The girl had vanished into the labyrinth of the foster care system. I was about to give up when I got an unexpected break. I was changing light bulbs in the lobby when I overheard 2 older housekeepers talking in Spanish, not realizing I could understand most of what they were saying. They were discussing someone named Carmen, who used to work with Maria and still kept in touch with the girl. It took some careful questioning and a promise to buy lunch, but I eventually got Carmen's contact information. She was suspicious when I called, but something in my voice must have convinced her I was genuine. We met at a small Mexican restaurant far from Riverside Towers. Carmen was in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. She listened to my story without interruption, nodding occasionally as if I was confirming something she already knew. "Isabella," she said when I finished. "She's 9 now, lives with a foster family in Gresham. I check on her when I can, bring her little things." She hesitated. "She still asks about her mama. Does she remember what happened?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "She remembers everything." But nobody believed her. A child's imagination, they said. Trauma playing tricks. But I knew Maria. I knew what that man was doing. And now... She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the address. The foster family. They're not bad people, but they don't understand. Isabella needs someone who knows the truth." I stared at the paper in my hands, understanding finally what Maria had been trying to tell me. Why she had chosen to appear to me that night. She wasn't trying to scare me away. She was asking for help. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, background checks, and meetings with social workers. I had no experience as a foster parent, was single, and barely making ends meet. But I also had an advocate no one could see. Strange things kept happening that worked in my favor. Lost paperwork would mysteriously turn up, appointments would suddenly open up, and people who should have been skeptical of me seemed inexplicably inclined to help. The first time I met Isabella, I knew immediately she was the child I'd been glimpsing around the building. She had her mother's eyes, and the same quiet dignity. She was shy at first, but when I mentioned living at Riverside Towers, something changed in her expression. "Do you see her too?" she whispered. "My mama?" I nodded, and she burst into tears. Not tears of fear or sadness, but of relief. Finally, someone believed her. It took months of home studies and interviews, but eventually I was approved as Isabella's foster parent. The day she moved in with me was the day I gave notice at Riverside Towers. We found a small house in a different part of town, far from the shadows of luxury high-rises. The night before we left Riverside Towers for good, I went up to apartment 3613 one last time. The renovation was finally complete, and a new tenant was scheduled to move in the following week. The air was different now, lighter somehow, and when Maria appeared, she was smiling. No distorted features, no overwhelming sadness, just a mother looking at peace. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and real. It was the first and last time I ever heard her speak. Then she was gone, leaving behind only the faintest scent of flowers. That was 5 years ago. Isabella is 14 now, thriving in school and slowly healing from her trauma. Sometimes she still has nightmares, but they're becoming less frequent. We talk about Maria often, keeping her memory alive not as a ghost story, but as the strong, loving mother she was. I still drive past Riverside Towers sometimes. It looks different to me now, not just glass and steel reaching for the sky, but a monument to the invisible people who keep our world running and to the secrets that buildings can hold. I think about Maria and about all the other stories that never make the headlines, all the other ghosts that might be waiting for someone to finally listen. As for apartment 3613, I hear it's had a string of tenants, none staying longer than a few months, but the strange occurrences have stopped. Whatever unfinished business kept Maria's spirit there has been resolved. She found what she was looking for, someone to take care of her daughter, to tell her story, to make sure she wasn't forgotten. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Isabella says she can still feel her mother's presence, not as a frightening apparition, but as a warm, protective embrace. And I believe her. Because I've learned that not all ghost stories are about fear and darkness. Sometimes they're about love, justice, and the lengths a mother's spirit will go to protect her child. Even now, years later, I can still see Maria's eyes in my dreams. But I'm not afraid anymore. Instead, I feel grateful that of all the people who passed through Riverside Towers, she chose to appear to me. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as ghost stories, and the real haunting isn't about spirits at all. It's about the weight of untold truths and the power of finally giving voice to the voiceless. People ask me if I believe in ghosts now. I tell them I believe in justice. I believe in listening to the stories that others try to bury. And most of all, I believe that sometimes what looks like a haunting is really just a mother's love, reaching beyond the grave to protect her child. As for Isabella and me, we're doing okay. More than okay, actually. Last year, I finally finished that business degree and Isabella made honor roll. We have a good life, but we never forget how we came to be a family. Every year on the anniversary of Maria's death, we visit her grave. Isabella leaves flowers, and I leave a promise that her daughter will always be safe, always be loved, and always remember the mother who loved her so much she refused to leave this world until she knew her child would be okay. That's my ghost story. Not one of horror, really, but of hope. Because sometimes the scariest things in this world aren't the spirits of the dead, but the secrets of the living. And sometimes, what looks like a haunting is really just a miracle in disguise. The Echo in Shadow Valley. I never should have taken that job in Shadow Valley, Montana. The listing seemed perfect at first. A remote forest ranger position with above-average pay and housing included. After 5 years of grinding away at my conservation biology degree in Boston and another 3 years of dead-end seasonal park work, it felt like my big break. But now, sitting in my cramped apartment in Seattle with the lights on at 3 a.m., I still can't shake what happened there. The memories haunt me, pushing sleep away like a jealous lover. I need to write it all down, to try to make sense of it. Maybe then I'll finally find some peace. It started in late September 2024. I had just accepted the position of senior ranger at Shadow Valley State Forest, a sprawling wilderness area tucked away in the northern Rockies. The park superintendent, Dave Marshall, seemed thrilled to have me. "We've been trying to fill this position for months," he told me over the phone. "The last ranger, well, he left rather suddenly. Personal reasons." Something in his tone made me pause, but I was too excited about the opportunity to dwell on it. The drive from Boston took 4 days. As I wound my way through the mountains in my old Subaru, packed to the roof with everything I owned, the urban sprawl of the East Coast gave way to increasingly remote terrain. By the time I turned onto the unmarked dirt road leading to Shadow Valley, I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. The forest pressed in close on both sides, ancient pines stretching their branches over the road like grasping fingers. My new home was a 2-story ranger cabin dating back to the 1940s, situated on a small clearing about a mile from the main park office. Dave helped me unload my car and gave me a quick tour. "Solar panels were installed last year, so you've got reliable power," he explained, leading me through the musty rooms. "Satellite internet too, though it can be spotty. Nearest town is Miller's Creek, about 45 minutes away. You'll want to stock up on supplies. Winters get rough up here." I noticed he seemed eager to leave, constantly checking his watch. Just before he headed out, he paused in the doorway. "One more thing. We've had some issues with hikers going off trail in the north section, near Old Miners Ridge. Best to steer clear of that area after dark. Radio reception gets weird up there." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, his truck kicking up dust as he sped down the access road. The first few weeks were uneventful. I settled into my new routine: morning patrols, trail maintenance, paperwork, and the occasional lost hiker to redirect. The autumn colors were stunning, painting the valley in brilliant shades of red and gold. But as October wore on and the days grew shorter, I began to notice oddities. It started with the echoes. Shadow Valley got its name from the way sound behaved there. Something about the geological formation created unusual acoustic effects. But these weren't normal echoes. I'd be walking the trails and hear what sounded like footsteps behind me, perfectly mimicking my own. When I stopped, they'd continue for a few more steps before falling silent. If I called out, sometimes the echo would come back distorted, as if the words had been run through some twisted filter. Then there were the dreams. Every night, the same sequence. I'd find myself walking through the forest in the dark, following the sound of someone crying. The trees would part to reveal an old mining shaft, its timbers rotting and collapsed. A voice would call my name from deep within, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I tried to rationalize it. The isolation was getting to me, I told myself. I'd been living alone in the woods for weeks. Of course, my mind was playing tricks. But then came the night that changed everything. It was late October, just before sunset. I was finishing up my evening patrol when my radio crackled to life. Through the static, I could barely make out a woman's voice. "Help! Lost! Near the old mine!" The transmission cut out. I tried to respond, but got only static. Protocol said to wait for backup in situations like this, but the temperature was dropping fast. If someone was really lost up there, they might not survive the night. I grabbed my emergency pack and headed toward Old Miners Ridge. The sun was setting faster than I expected, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. As I climbed higher, the static on my radio grew worse, eventually dissolving into a low, pulsing hum that made my teeth ache. I switched it off. The old mining area was a maze of overgrown trails and collapsed shafts, remnants of a brief silver boom in the 1890s. According to the park records, the mines had been sealed decades ago after several accidents. But as I approached the ridge, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the main shafts was open, its heavy steel gate lying twisted and broken on the ground. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service, is anyone there?" The echo that came back wasn't my voice. It was a child's laugh, high and clear in the gathering dark. I should have turned back. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. But then I saw the footprints in the mud near the mine entrance. Small, like a child's, and fresh. Without thinking, I pulled out my flashlight and stepped into the shaft. The tunnel descended at a steep angle, its walls slick with moisture. My light beam caught the gleam of old rails and rotting support beams. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a metallic tang that burned the back of my throat. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and that's where I saw them. Hundreds of handprints on the walls, glowing with a faint phosphorescence in my flashlight beam. Some were large, adult-sized, but most were small, children's hands. They seemed to pulse with a light of their own, creating shifting patterns that made my head spin. And they weren't old. The rock face was wet, as if they'd been pressed there moments before. A whisper echoed through the chamber, too quiet to make out words, but clearly coming from deeper in the mine. I took another step forward, and my light caught something half buried in the mud. A small shoe, caked with dirt but modern. And beside it, something else. A ranger's badge, corroded and green with age. The whispers grew louder, resolving into words. "You came back. You finally came back." I spun around, my light beam dancing across the chamber. In its sweep, I caught a glimpse of something that stopped my heart. Faces in the shadows, dozens of them, pale as milk and watching me with black, empty eyes. Children's faces, but wrong somehow, stretched and distorted like reflections in a funhouse mirror. I ran. I don't remember dropping my flashlight or finding my way out of the mine. The next clear memory I have is of crashing through the forest in complete darkness, branches whipping my face. Behind me, carried on the wind, I could hear them following, the patter of small feet and high, eager laughter. I made it back to my cabin and locked every door and window. As I huddled in the corner of my bedroom, shaking, my radio came back to life. Through the static, I heard a man's voice. Dave, the superintendent. Kate, are you there? We've been trying to reach you for hours." I grabbed the radio. "Dave, there's something in the mine. I don't know what I saw, but..." "Kate, listen to me very carefully," he cut in. "Whatever you do, don't look out your windows. We're sending help, but it'll take time to reach you. Just don't look outside. And if you hear anyone calling your name, even if it sounds like me or another ranger, don't answer." "What's going on?" I demanded. "What aren't you telling me?" There was a long pause, filled with static. When Dave spoke again, his voice was heavy. "The mines. There was an accident in 1891. A cave-in trapped 23 children down there, part of a school field trip to see the silver mining operation. The rescue attempt failed. They sealed up the mines after that, but things kept happening. People would go missing, especially children. We'd find their shoes near the mine entrance, just like the others." "Others?" "Other rangers," he said quietly. the ones who came before you. They'd report hearing children crying near the mine, go to investigate, and we never saw them again. That's why the position was open. That's why I tried to warn you about the north section. But they always find a way to call to people. They're lonely down there, you see. They want playmates. A sharp crack made me jump. Outside my window, a small hand pressed against the glass, leaving a glowing print like the ones in the mine. Another joined it, then another. Through the glass, I could hear them calling my name in sweet, sing-song voices. "They're here," I whispered into the radio. "Just hold on," Dave said. "Whatever you hear, whatever you see, don't..." The radio died with a burst of static, and in the silence that followed, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. The creak of floorboards in the room above me, followed by the patter of small feet and children's laughter. I'd like to say I was brave, that I fought back or tried to escape. But the truth is, I fainted. When I came to, I was in the Millers Creek Hospital. They told me the rescue team found me unconscious in my cabin the next morning, with no sign of disturbance except for dozens of small, glowing handprints on every window. I quit that day. Dave didn't try to stop me, just nodded sadly and handed me my final paycheck. As I was leaving his office, he called after me. "Kate, do you hear them still? In your dreams?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth is, I do hear them. Every night their laughter echoes through my dreams. And sometimes, when I wake in the dark of my Seattle apartment, I swear I can see glowing handprints on my bedroom window, slowly fading like the last embers of a dying fire. I check the news sometimes, looking for stories about Shadow Valley. Last week, I saw they'd hired a new ranger. Young guy, fresh out of college. The article mentioned his enthusiasm for working with the park's youth education programs. I should warn him. I should tell someone what really happens in those mines. But who would believe me? And besides, maybe this time will be different. Maybe he'll be smarter than I was. Maybe he won't hear the children calling in the night, their voices echoing off the valley walls like bells in an empty church. But I know better. They're patient, those children in the dark. They've waited over 100 years for new playmates. They can wait a little longer. And somewhere in Shadow Valley, as the sun sets behind the mountains, a ranger's radio crackles to life with the sound of children crying, calling for help from deep within the earth.